All right, welcome everyone. We'll give it a moment or two for people to join, and then we can get started with our Black in STEM panel discussion today. All right, why don't we get started? Welcome to this week's A. Watson Armor seminar. As we're doing this February, this is one of our seminars that is related to the Field Museum's celebration of Black History Month. And it's going to be the first of two panel discussions that we're doing on the general topic of Black in STEM. Before we get into that and I introduce our panelists today, we'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So the Field Museum is located on land that is unceded territory of the Potawatomi Nation, and also is the home of the Odawa and Ojibwe nations, parts of the Three Fires Confederacy. Chicago was also home to the Hosack and Myaamia nations, and an important site of trade, travel, and healing for more than a dozen other native tribes. The state of Illinois is currently home to more than 75,000 tribal members, and it's important that we always remember that we are guests on the lands of the native nations in this area. So with that in mind, we're going to have three speakers joining us today. The first is Divya Anantharaman, who is the founder of Gotham Taxidermy. She's a taxidermist, and she's located in New York City and Brooklyn. And among her various achievements, she's a co-author of the book Stuffed Animals, A Modern Guide to Taxidermy. Our second speaker today is Foreman Bandama. Foreman is an African archaeologist who specializes in studies of ceramic, glass beads, and metallurgy, as well as African achievements related to the development of complex societies and their interactions with other parts of the world. Foreman recently joined us at the Field Museum as our new assistant curator of African anthropology, and he's also cross-appointed as a faculty member at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And finally, our third speaker today is Kiersten Formoso. Kiersten is a PhD candidate at the University of Southern California and the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. She's a vertebrate paleontologist, and her research focuses on the evolution of secondarily marine tetrapods like mosasaurs and whales. And I'll be moderating today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ken Angelzik, and I'm the fossil mammal curator here at the Field Museum. So we'll start out with the kind of opportunity for each speaker to introduce themselves and give some background about their kind of professional journeys up to this point and kind of thoughts. And then we'll start to do sort of the question and answer kind of discussion part of the seminar. So for that, we'll be using the question and answer function. So if you have questions that you'd like to ask, please enter them there. And Matt and Emily and I will try to make sure that we get to as many of those as possible. We also have some pre-submitted questions that we can go over as well. So we'll see how things are going with that. So yeah, with that, I guess I will turn things over to our speakers. Divya, do you want to start out by kind of giving us a little bit about your background?
Sure, yeah, I can do that. I'm going to share a small slide presentation first. Cool, and if not, I'm showing up. So hi everybody, my name is Divya, and I work as a taxidermist. So taxidermy is kind of unique in science because it's a bit of art and a bit of science. It involves preserving animals for study, for science communication, also as appreciation as artwork. So it's a little bit of everything. Taxidermy involves preserving the skin of an animal, then mounting it onto an anatomically accurate body form to create this lifelike representation of this animal. And so its uses are very wide. So educational, like in museums and nature centers, and artistic use, like in home decor, and other uses like that. But I mainly specialize in birds across all of those uses. So I got into taxidermy because I really fell in love with it because I've always grown up in a big city, and I would go to natural history museums or science museums, and I would see these animals and these dioramas and these displays. And I really felt like that was how I connected with nature and learned about what animals were. And I was just struck with like awe and wonder at seeing some of these animals that I would never see where I grew up in Miami or where I am in New York City now. I would never see these animals roaming around there, but I would see them in these displays. And I was just so struck with how cool it was that I could see them there. And was also really curious about how they got there, and I was curious about who made them too. So in starting my own work, I started looking for old books about taxidermy and researching online. And I was initially self-taught, and I first went into a career in the fashion industry, and I was doing taxidermy just as a hobby. And I worked in fashion for almost 10 years before making the career change in taxidermy. And it was really based on just trying to make my hobby into a business viable so I could make a living off of it. And I did that through a lot of independent study and being self-taught, building up my skills, and then gaining the confidence to go to taxidermy conventions to learn and meet other taxidermists. But a huge booster of my career has been social media, because through social media, I found a platform to share my work. And also I found more people like me, a more diverse community. And facing some of the barriers to entry in the field also inspired me to start wanting to teach taxidermy and share one-day classes, and also just share a behind the scenes and a peek into my work online, because I hadn't had an easy time in finding that information. So I really wanted to make it easier for other people in hopes that it would attract more people to the field. And make it more accessible. And I'm just really passionate about diversity in this field, because whether it's for science or art, taxidermy is all about storytelling. And stories are best when there's a variety of voices telling them. And I wasn't seeing that. So I wanted to see that. And it's definitely been challenging, starting until now, and ongoing. It's definitely a challenge because there's still not a lot of diversity in this field. And there's a lot of gatekeeping around knowledge and what is like quote unquote a real taxidermist. But there's also the larger problem of just society's misconceptions about taxidermy in general being this like crude or brutal art form. So there's a lot of just challenge that we're working with. But the goal is to realize like taxidermy is really all about conservation. People do this because they love animals. And I think one of the biggest challenges I faced starting out was being intimidated by the lack of diversity in the field, and seeing a lot of the experts that were there weren't people who looked like me or my friends or my family. And a lot of times being the only person of color in the room, it drove me to look at the history of this field, and find the stories of BIPOC in this field as well. So some of the figures I've included on this slide, I feel like it's really important to tell their stories and share their stories, because it's, we need to realize that there needs to be more diversity in this field. And in my own career now, there's a lot of self-advocating and being very disciplined in that hope that, that we will diversify this field, that there will be more people attracted to it. And so that my immediate circle in the field is pretty small, but it's pretty valuable. And then, I've eventually found mentors who sort of saw my differences and met me with the appreciation and honesty and curiosity of understanding why I want to change this field and why it's important to have diversity in this field. And so hopefully one day no one will have to go through a lot of the barriers that I had to go through. And I'm just excited to be here today to share about not just my experience in answering questions, but also to listen and learn, and also to share that the definition of what a science career can even look like can be really expanded to include some creativity as well, because again, taxidermy is about art and science and everything in between it. So that's a bit about me.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Foreman, do you want to go next?
Greetings, and thank you so much, Ken, for welcoming and the introductions. What a privilege it is to be here today. My name is Foreman Bandama. I was born in southeastern Zimbabwe in Africa, and I trained in archaeology at the University of Zimbabwe for my undergrad before I transitioned into the science part of the archaeology when I went to the University of Cape Town to do my master's, which was then upgraded to a PhD. So archaeology is a very interesting discipline which deals with understanding the past using the material remains. In other words, wherever we are staying today, we interact with the environment, we interact with the building, we interact with other people. And at some point in time, some of our clues of how we live can be imprinted into the material that we interact with. So by looking at the material that people leave behind, you can be able to tell what kind of a person one might have been, or what was their worldview, how they thought, by how they did things and how they express themselves in objects, because objects commodify or they objectify how ideas are in one's mind. So that's basically the beauty of archaeology. But perhaps my specialization is in archaeometallurgy, which is a slight different from general archaeology in the sense that it uses the modern day science, scientific technologies to analyze archaeological metals. This also includes the byproducts of the metallurgical processes, or the furnace installations, the slag that comes from the smelting, all those processes. You use modern technology to analyze those in order to reconstruct not just the technology, but also to ask and answer some big general questions that are of interest to archaeologists as well. So you are using modern science to understand the past technologies and past cultures, because the beauty of metallurgy is that as products of high temperature processes, the metals themselves, as well as the byproducts, your slugs, your furnace pieces, they retain within themselves the histories of the transformation that they went through. So you can be able to reconstruct, for example, the temperatures where a particular product was fired to, and you can be able to reconstruct some of those conditions and be able to tell the efficacy of some processes and to demonstrate innovations and other important things, which is one of my main reasons why I love archaeology a lot, because it gives me, as an African who grew up in Africa, a chance to speak for Africa, to speak for African achievements, to speak into the kind of things that Africa was able to achieve, which is why when I transitioned from Stone Age to metallurgy, I realized that there was a potential there in demonstrating at least much faster than I would do when I was still in Stone Age. And with that, obviously the attraction of the complex societies become very apparent. I've done work at the site of Great Zimbabwe, which is a medieval, capital of an empire or a state that grew in Southern Africa, which perhaps marks the height in terms of pre-colonial architectural achievements that you find in much of Africa south of the pyramids. Because we have, for example, the Great Enclosure, which rises, very high. Literally, when you're standing behind, below that wall at the Great Enclosure, you really feel very small. It is indeed the highest pre-colonial, dry stone built structure south of the pyramids. And it is not just big, but also the architecture that went into that. It's very beautiful. But all of this gives people like myself an opportunity to highlight those African achievements, because generally the story of Africa has been misread, misunderstood, misinterpreted, miscommunicated for a long time. And I think an impression has already been created in people's minds now that Africa has very little to offer. And yet, most of that just simply reflects our research coverage. We haven't done enough research to highlight all these achievements that are there in Africa. And if we are to start looking for them, we realize that Africa, it's perhaps a normal place with the story of humanity being also captured there in Africa. If humans from all over the world have been creative and they have been innovative and they've risen to their heights at different points in time, why not Africa? And I think that's basically what my scholarship tries to deal with. I also have, because the same techniques that I deal with in metallurgy, they can also be applied into glass beads and several other, materials like your ceramics or ceramic petrography. So because of that, I've tried to stretch my, my specialization into other areas just to understand the broad material culture. And in all this, to try and look for all those innovations, those achievements that we can see in Africa and how Africa connected with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Foreman. Kiersten, how about if you go next?
Yes, sounds good. Thank you so much, Ken, for inviting me to this. I really was excited when I got the email. I was like, yes, it's definitely something that I want to do. But so, hi, everybody. My name is Kiersten. I am a PhD candidate. I study vertebrate paleontology, which means I study fossils of animals that have a backbone. And not just fossils, a lot of paleontologists rely on modern animals, so we can use comparative anatomy, and it's really through the lens of modern animals that we can understand the anatomy of the past animals and the animals of the past that help us understand our modern animals and their evolution, how they came to be. And that really is what attracted me to paleontology overall, is the connection to the past and the present, and how the past has influenced our modern world. And so I'll get into what I study in a moment, but so a little bit on my background, my history. So I was born in New York City. My whole family's from New York City. I'm half Black and I'm half Cuban. And so after my parents had me, they're like, well, we kind of want to, move to a more suburban environment, as many people do. And so they left New York City, slowly but surely moved more west and west and west in New Jersey. And for those who know anything about New Jersey, it is not what The Sopranos depicts in all of the states, not entirely factories and highways and stuff. There's actually really beautiful rural areas in New Jersey. And so in Sussex County, which is in the northwest corner where there's mountains, that's where I grew up. And this is really relevant to my background and my inspiration for loving nature. I grew up with tons of deer and foxes, coyotes, black bears are really common, and just these beautiful rolling hills that are part of the Appalachians in this area. It's the only part of the Appalachian Trail that actually reaches New Jersey. And so I grew up in this absolutely beautiful natural environment. And I remember being struck from a really young age of looking at this environment and the animals and everything around and asking, wow, how did this all get here? And of course, later I would come to know that the Appalachians are some of the oldest mountains in the world, which is so cool. But I think growing up in this area of nature was really, really influential for me. There were some limitations, however. In this rural area, I was the only person of color in my school system for a really long time. I believe it was until 8th grade, so I was about 13 years old, where another Black girl actually came to my school from a more urban area. And I didn't realize at the time how isolating this was. It's something that you kind of realize later on, some weird hangups and other issues that you discover along the way. And so that was where I lived, where I felt isolated there. And then with regards to the field itself of paleontology, I've always been interested in biology. I think I told my mom the first job I ever wanted was paleontologist. Like, she says that I said that, I believe her. But then I look at my yearbooks in 7th grade, I think I said I wanted to be a marine biologist. So today I study fossils of marine animals. And so I was never stopped by the lack of diversity in paleontology. But the difference for me and others is that I grew up in an environment where I was already isolated as the only brown person. To me, it was exactly what I had expected and what I viewed the world as. And that is so not great for I would say a majority of people, because it wasn't exactly healthy for me either. And so I think it's really important, you know, representation matters, and people say that representation matters. Representation really does matter, because, you know, someone who's like me, who's interested in the natural world, may not have that same support system. They may not have access to nature. They may not have access to natural history museums, all of these things that influence people. But what they might have access to is YouTube videos of diverse scientists, of TV shows showing diverse scientists, movies showing diverse scientists. So all of this works together to help these people, that these rising scientists potentially, that don't have kind of what I would have had to help me get here. And so that's why for me it's really important for me to do events like this. That's why I was so excited when Ken sent the invite. And yeah, so that's kind of my background for how I got here. I've always loved science. I had a little aircraft phase that I still have, where in high school I'm like, oh, I want to fly airplanes, but I think that comes with the whimsical nature that a lot of scientists have. But yeah, so I currently study what are called secondarily aquatic tetrapods. It just means animals that evolved to go back into the aquatic environment after being on land for a couple million years. So whales did this. Whales have terrestrial ancestors. They had 4 legs before they evolved to go into back into aquatic environments. Mosasaurs, for anyone who saw Jurassic World, the mosasaur is the big swimming one that ate the shark. That's the mosasaur. They're lizards that evolved to go back into aquatic environments. And then animals like plesiosaurs, the long-necked flippered ones, and animals like seals and sea lions, which are currently transitioning. People can tell sea lions have 4 limbs. But so I study how their land ancestors, how their land shape, the way they walked on land, might have influenced and constrained and controlled the manner in which they evolved into aquatic environments. So that's how I was able to achieve me being a marine biologist as a paleontologist for my 7th grade self. But so that's me, and that's what I do. And I'm gonna hopefully elucidate some more about myself with answering the questions. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kiersten. So just a reminder, if you'd like to submit questions, you can do so with the question and answer function. Just type in your questions there. But we'll get started with some of our pre-submitted questions. So maybe something that kind of jumps off of what you're just saying. Can you talk about a big hurdle that you had to jump to get into a career in science? And the person who asked this question said, for example, mine was that I thought people would always dislike me for acting smart. So someone had to show me that it was possible to be cool and smart.
Are we gonna do these in order, just whoever?
I would say just, yeah, we can just do it kind of whoever. So feel free to jump in.
Well, firstly, no one should ever dislike you for acting smart. And if they dislike you for acting smart, that is totally on them. But so as far as a big hurdle, I did have a period in my life after my undergraduate degree where I went to grad school for paleontology, and I wasn't really prepared. My undergrad degree was ecology and evolution. I chose that major because it had the word evolution in it. Very fitting. It trained me well, but it was more training for, I would say, an ecology and maybe like an evolutionary biologist track, not so much paleo. So I didn't really have a geology background or just actual paleontological methods, things like phylogenetics, which is the methods that you use to build trees, evolutionary trees and things like that. So I went on to do graduate studies, and I was just not prepared. I'd worked so hard in my undergrad. I graduated in 4 years flat, no summer or winter courses, because I couldn't afford it. I had to graduate in 4 years. My student debt is already so high. So I was tired when I graduated. And so I went on to graduate studies when I probably wasn't ready. And in hindsight, there were so many signs I had in my late senior year where I'm like, I should have taken a year off, and that would have really helped. But so I did graduate studies only for a year in paleontology, and I was like, that's it, I'm gonna leave. I was exhausted, I was depressed, I just was like, that's it, I'm leaving science forever. And I really mean this, like I was done. Ended up taking a year off. I worked at the Cheesecake Factory, and I had some really influential conversations with amazing vertebrate paleontologists in the field that motivated me to come back. And honestly, without those people supporting me, you know, and then this is why it's important to support all your students, support your students of color and more, because I was about to be gone. And so that was a really big hurdle. As a kind of a saddish, you know, moment in my life where I thought like all my dreams of being a scientist were going to be gone. But because I had a support network, they helped me back. But at the time, that was really sad and really scary. So I was exhausted after college. That was a big hurdle. I worked jobs, you know, to tons of extracurriculars, just too much. But yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think a very big hurdle that I can talk about. Yeah, I have some main twists and turns in my story. Like the first time when I had to take a 250-mile journey into Harare, the capital, with only money for a one-way ticket. I didn't even have money for fees and stuff, but all those are just perhaps not much. But in terms of the science component, because I started my school, I really went to a rural school, which didn't have any science subjects at all, like any. So it meant that I had no chance of taking science. In my mind, it meant that all my dreams and ambitions of being in the sciences were gone. And when I went, to university, I ended up, of course, with archaeology as a subject, and my first, introduction into kind of postgrad studies with honors, I dealt with Stone Age. So when I went for my master's, now doing with archaeometallurgy, my professor, when I first met with him on the first day, he took out a book and he handed it over to me, and then he said, we can talk tomorrow. The book was entitled Chemistry for Dummies. I did indeed at the time feel like a dummy, because I looked at that book and I was like, what did I get myself into? Because I really had no clue. That was my first encounter with anything close to chemistry and anything close to science. And this is happening at a time when I'm supposed to be doing my master's by research. So I didn't have to sit in for any classes in chemistry. So it was a bit of a test of my mental power. How was I gonna respond to this? But I was also excited at the same time about the opportunity of having to do exactly what I had hoped to do growing up. I really wanted to do some sciences, and I had no chance, because of my background. And now I had that chance, and it was sitting right before me. But between me and my dream was that very dreaded book, Chemistry for Dummies, which didn't look like anything, very simplified at the time. It was only with the time that I got to at least relax and adjust and get to know it. But it really was very interesting and entertaining, and the whole journey, turned me into somebody I think I am proud of myself now, that I was really able to do that. And after a few months, I was even able to produce results that led to the upgrading of my thesis from a master's to PhD. So that was a bit of a hurdle, a bit of a challenge, coming from a no science background straight into science at master's level. Thanks.
So I would say one of the biggest hurdles I faced to get into my career was a lot of the gatekeeping. There are just people who don't want to be as free in sharing their knowledge or sharing their techniques. I guess in the case of taxidermy, it's all about techniques and stuff. So there are a lot of people who don't share that knowledge or the techniques just based on based on assumptions, based on like fear of it spreading, the fear of that knowledge being in the hands of someone they don't know, or someone that's not like someone that they normally know, which was just such a, it's just such a challenge to experience that and to like I was questioning myself, and sometimes I'm like, what is wrong with me? Why aren't people talking to me? And I guess it took a while to understand that the problem wasn't with me, it was with it was with the system of gatekeeping and the system of guarding knowledge in kind of in an unnecessary way, honestly, and based on like the judgments being made of anyone who is just different. So even to this day, even though I have a career, I don't think I really like went past the gatekeepers or got into the gate. I think I just found my way around it, just using, trying to keep, like thinking creatively and finding a way that, knowing that there must be more people out there who want to get into this field that are, that aren't of the dominant culture. So yeah, I was just using that creativity and, especially now, I think I said it before, we'll say it again, but social media was a huge tool and the internet was a huge tool, and finding not just an audience, but finding mentors and just finding people who cared, and people who cared who weren't just in this field. The sciences do all work together. The sciences and arts all work together too. So just finding people who are interested, who could be role models, even if they couldn't show me a taxidermy technique, they could teach me about anatomy, they could teach me about all of the different sciences that applied to my field, and be mentors in a way that that I might not have been finding within the field itself. And not seeing myself in a lot of ways also motivated me to look even harder, in history, and to look even harder in research and do stuff like that. So thank you.
Okay. So we'll do a couple of the questions that have been submitted now in the question and answer. So we'll start with one that is kind of a specific follow-up to that. So Divya, how did you start doing taxidermy, and what was your first project?
My first project was a squirrel that I found as when I was hiking. It was deceased there, so I had my kit. I had like a kit that I would walk around with that was just like a specimen transport kit that I put together. It was a little cooler and some gloves and plastic to keep everything wrapped up. And the way I did it was following a book. So I bought, I think I went online and bought a book. I was collecting books at the time, either from like used bookstores or thrift stores, or at that time, like eBay would have a lot of different books on it. So I was looking for books and I would collect them. And when I found that first specimen, I was like, all right, I'm going to try this. And it was very much just self-taught, and trying it, following that book, and just keeping, I didn't have like a separate studio. So I made an area of my own, of my apartment that would be just for taxidermy. That would be just it was just a little tray table that I could sanitize and everything. So that squirrel was the first thing I worked on, and it was through, it was through being self-directed through a book, and then finding, and later on, like finding YouTube videos and stuff like that to compare my own techniques against.
Okay. So another question that is more general, and I think kind of picks up on things that each of you have said. What about the culture of academia, and I guess sort of STEM more broadly, needs to change to make science more welcoming to people of color? And how can those of us who are low ranked in that system and don't have a lot of institutional power help to make those changes?
I can think from my head right now how important sometimes it is because the biggest struggle, in as much as there are institutional systems and structures that can impede the process, but the biggest fight is in the mind of that person of color. Can that person believe in themselves before they even look for approval from somebody else? Can they believe in themselves that they're actually capable of standing on the world stage and speaking with, with authority, and they're capable of pursuing science, they're capable of achieving high-level science? And in most cases, that is not the case. So I think it starts with those that you can reach, not necessarily the institution, but those that you can reach. If you can reach any person of color through school visits, through whatever setup that you can reach them, and just help them believe that they are human enough and they are capable enough that if they believe in themselves, there's absolutely nothing that can really ultimately block them, because that's exactly what it is. There's no amount of institutional blocking that can ultimately kill that dream, that desire. It might delay it, it might come at much later stage, but if you keep pushing and if you keep believing that you can do it, someday a door will open, and you will certainly be able to do it. But I think it starts with that person believing that it is indeed possible. Most of the damage that has happened in the minds of most of the young people, and not just perhaps the young people. It includes, of course, the parents. That some of the parents, they do not even believe that their children can also do that. And I think it starts with those small encouragements, which one can do with very little or no institutional backing. Encourage the person of color to believe that they are also capable of doing a high level science, that they are also good enough, that if they believe in themselves, in their dreams, and pursue those dreams relentlessly, sometimes it can happen. I say this because literally when I left my home area to go to Harare, the capital, to do my first degree, I was almost totally convinced that there was nothing that could stop me. Not even the thought that I only had enough money for a one-way ticket to go there was going to dissuade me. I didn't even think whether I was going to sleep in a pipe or wherever under the tree. I just had so much determination that I was going to do this, and there was nothing that could stop me. And sometimes it needs that kind of belief in oneself that I can do this, and until or before you reach that, it becomes very difficult for one to really break through into this world of sciences. Thanks.
Great. I'll be really fast with this. With regards to the culture of academia and like being, low ranked, not like super high levels. I think a lot of people use the word allyship, right? Like we have to be an ally, but you have to be an authentic ally and recognize that people of color tend to have other mental things going on that don't allow us always to focus 100% on the science. And like so many people of the higher ranking one, like, oh, where's your science? Where's your science? Just give me the science, give me grants, give me, and a lot of people can't achieve that. But for example, sometimes I take like half days off to organize my finances. I didn't come from any generational wealth. My dad's an immigrant. My mom was Black from Harlem. I have lots of financial limitations, and my friends don't understand, like, oh, how what are you doing? You have to do this, and like, we're doing our research and we're doing reading and stuff. I'm like, I cannot do that right now. I have to figure this out financially. So there's the isolation of going to a conference and realizing, like, wow, I'm like the only brown person here. That is such a mental load. And so it's not like that can be fixed overnight with regards to the culture, but what can be done as an ally is you lock arms with someone and be like when someone comes down on this person and it's like, well, where's your productivity? Where's this? And the low ranking people, if you're white, can say like, no, they can't do that. They have these other mental hurdles that we don't even have to think about. You have to try to empathize with their experience and their background and their limitations and the weight, this ball and chain that so many of us are holding in society. And so academia, I don't know how to make this happen, truly, but I know that academia simply needs to be more accommodating of these things, because that's part of that leaky pipeline, is that people will make it into academia, they get PhDs, even postdocs, and they just can't do it because they can't keep up, even though they're fully capable and they are still producing. But we have to go so much extra. Like for me to overcome all this like extra mental stuff going on in my brain, I have to go extra compared to my peers, and it's just tiring. And some of us just say no more, and that's why a lot don't go further, and the ones who do stay burn out and tired. So I think understanding the weight that some of us people of color are carrying because of that position in society. Academia needs to do better at that, and like lower ranking people can kind of convey that to the upper because they have the power, hopefully, to do that. So that's all. Yeah, I would say not all. There's no all about anything I just said. It's a hard thing to change, but that would be a big one. Yeah.
I'll be pretty quick too. But the other thing too, like speaking of allyship, that's a word that's thrown around a lot. I feel like a lot of these conversations only happen when people of color are in the room. And allies need to be having those conversations when we're not there as well. Like if you're in a room of whatever topic you're studying or whatever subject that your expertise is in, and you don't see people of color there, like all of you also need to be asking why is this and what can we do as well, and not only put that burden onto people of color, because as it was said before, there's a lot of stuff, there's so much going on that you don't know about, that you might not be thinking about that we are. And I would say, like, on the other side too, like to know your own, like, as you know, if you are a person of color in one of these fields and you're looking for this institutional validation, it can be really tough to not feel like you're getting it, but to just constantly ask yourself like who you're trying to reach and why you're there, and also constantly reminding yourself who you are, and like Foreman said before, like believing in your power, because you do have it, it is there, but a lot of times believing in it can be a challenge.
I really appreciate all of those answers. Particularly, I guess, speaking personally, as someone in a more privileged place in the power structure, it's very important for me to hear these things so I know how to be a better ally. So I appreciate your openness. I guess kind of continuing along that line, one of our pre-submitted questions is, what do you wish you'd known before entering your field of study? And I guess what advice would you have for people who are coming up behind you to maybe make the process that you've gone through easier or different than what you've experienced?
Okay, I'll go first just because it can be quick. So as far as, also, if you can hear helicopters in the background, I'm so sorry. LAPD is just today. So as far as what I wish I knew before going into the field, I'll give like a strongly academic answer for people who are maybe at the undergrad level or in high school, wanting to know what classes and things to focus on. So stats are really important. Had I known, moving forward, that I would have relied so heavily on something like R, which is a statistical software, I would have paid more attention in my biostats courses in undergrad and probably taken a couple extra ones. So if there's a strength in actually being academically prepared for these fields, the passion is really important to have, and the support from people. But I got to tell you, all that feels a lot better when you yourself are comfortable with what you're doing and you're knowledgeable and you know how you've been exposed to it. You don't have to be an expert, but as long as you've seen it before. Had I known that, I would have definitely focused in on different types of stats courses, would have taken more geology and sedimentology and stratigraphy courses that would have prepared me, because a lot of the stress that I've had is feelings of inadequacy, of like, oh, I don't know what this is, I don't know how to do this. And that really compounds to like that kind of imposter syndrome that a lot of graduate students have, and especially a lot of graduate students of color. So if I had taken these classes, I probably would have done better early on. It's all smoothed out since. I still could use a couple beefed up quantitative paleontology type courses and things of that nature, but knowing what you're doing helps a lot with those feelings that a lot of people just have in general going to academia. So for vertebrate paleontologists, for future paleontologists in the room, anatomy courses, geology courses, stats, a lot of math, and writing. Writing is really important, like really important for science and achieving grants. And almost every school has some type of grant writing course, and I would definitely recommend it. So all of those things would be helpful. It would have made it a lot easier for me, and so I'm conveying that to you all to make it easier for you there.
I'll be pretty short too. There are, I guess, a couple of things I wish I'd known getting in. I think one was that I don't need you don't need the validation of others to continue in your field, to attempt and get started in a field that you want to. I mean, like, it's going to be harder. I think from my background, since taxidermy is not like a degree program or something, it is, you know, you can very much get into it being self-taught and improving, you know, and improving your skill on your own and stuff. But to just be careful of who I'm looking for validation from, to see if they're really looking at the work I'm doing or if they're making judgments about me. I wish I was more guarded and more stern with my boundaries in the beginning. But the other side of just approaching being a beginner, it's actually a really exciting time because you have these precious moments of learning, and you are constantly learning. And I'm sorry, there's probably car noises from outside or motorcycle noises from outside. But these moments of learning, this feeling of, as soon as you get into something, this information that you're reading, this information that you're practicing, it's a really exciting time because you have so much potential to, to apply your creativity, to maybe use a technique you haven't used before and to put your own twist on something. So I would say to hold on to that feeling, that same excitement and that eagerness and that curiosity as a beginner throughout the whole time, and that there's no rush to become an expert, and that even if someone is an expert, like, everyone is constantly learning and no one person will ever know it all, or, that there really is no end to that learning. And I think that's why we're all interested in the sciences, because it's always revealing something to us. So to just keep that, to keep that spark constantly lit and alive and going.
I do think that the biggest fight, the biggest struggle is mostly in the mind. I'm standing here and I look back at some of my primary school classmates and some high school classmates whom I believe even up to now, they were certainly way better than me in some other subjects and some other corners and areas. And that they had so much potential, and yet there were so many obstacles. I think to overcome some of those obstacles takes some bit of mental strength and some bit of personal conviction, and convincing yourself that you don't have to see too far, but at least you have to believe that at this level that I am, I'm able to achieve what I am facing now, even without casting the net too far into the future. If you're afraid of disappointments like others, but I think many of those of my classmates who have perhaps been standing where I'm standing today, or even done much better, if they had that little extra edge, that little extra belief in themselves that I'm better than how I'm viewed by others. I'm better than I am more of what I view myself than more of how others view me. And I think that is unfortunately not very easy because of the long history of incorrect education, or the education systems that look down on on the person of color and elevate the others at the expense of the others. And it's a big fight. It looks a bit small and general, but I think it is a big fight that that takes a lot of. It's very taxing on one person's mind and conviction. And sometimes if you do not have a percentage of belief in yourself, it becomes very difficult to then start pushing, because already you are saying this is a lost battle. It's a defeated front. For myself, I had classmates who, because my home area is very close to South Africa, people would easily cross into South Africa and take some menial jobs, sometimes as a security or other kinds of jobs. And you look back to the class test that you're having, but you're saying that that person was there. He could have at least by now done much more than just that. But perhaps when you are faced with not just personal challenges, but also national challenges, sometimes with the economy being down, and very little motivation. The most educated person around you is most likely your teacher, and that teacher perhaps is struggling to make ends meet, and you look at yourself like, do I really want to study so that I can be like that? But I think it takes a bit of vision and a bit of personal belief in oneself to be able to overcome some of those. And that becomes, if you're convinced at an early stage that I can do this, I think it becomes much easier going forward.
Okay, another one of the questions that was submitted in the Q&A, can you speak to the challenges and limits of finding representation and community in the sciences with consideration to intersectionality and different personalities? I'm primarily curious if you noticed that the representation that you did see tended to reflect one personality type over another, and what that might have communicated.
So yeah, that's really tough, but it's a really good question because it's a very valid observation. In truth, as far as what I've seen is that, yeah, academia and science tends to reward representation of type A people, or maybe not quite type A, but people who are going to get the science done. And that typically reflects a various range of kind of driven, outgoing personalities. People can really sit down and just put out science like quickly, because that's kind of the currency of it. And when I say put out science, I mean publications and obtaining grants and things of that nature. So I would say, as far as what that reflects, so you asked if you noticed that the representation you did see tended to reflect one personality or other, and what that might have communicated. Well, that communicates that science is trying to be diverse, but still is rewarding a very specific type of person. So I'm just, you asked, can you speak to that? That is kind of my observation. I don't really have a solution, but that is kind of the truth. That these are the types of people that people of color, non-people of color are the types of people that I notice around me in the field. So yeah.
I would, just to continue on that, I would say in my field, it definitely seems to be that it's extroverts and workaholics that type of personality is most rewarded. But it's pretty unfair because not everyone has the capacity for that. Everyone has different working styles and speaking styles and personalities and learning styles. And so to me, that rewarding only a certain kind of personality just communicates it's not welcoming to other styles. And I think just the way that it can be, the way that there's a lot to do to address that, and making accommodations for different learning styles and different personality types, but also to be welcoming, to be just personally, like in my day-to-day, to just be welcoming of someone who might not have my personality, or someone who has the same personality, or anything in between. I think that is something, I guess, personally, that we can do, but I don't know how to institutionally change that, because that would mean changing like institutionally what is valued, and what seems to be valued is just constant, like endless productivity, which is not sustainable for humans. So it's definitely a tough one.
I think in my experience, I've come across different, of course, personalities and stuff, but I've met several groups that mostly will not drag you into something else that you yourself do not believe in. You yourself are not actively pushing and pursuing. But once you start push and pursue that, then they'll jump in and they'll support you, and you may end up actually doing very well. But I think the challenge is that gap between yourself and the starting, the law of motion. So it's easier to push something that is already rolling than the one that is kind of stationary. I think those seem to have been most of the personalities that I engaged with growing up. But you also have some that will start highlighting to you even at a very, very young age. I remember one of my high school teacher deep in rural southeastern Zimbabwe, who one day called me into his office and we sat together, and he said, "Hey, I see something here. I don't know if you see it yourself, but I think you seem to have, this drive, this hunger in you, which if you pursue and if you believe in yourself, I think you can become something." Sometimes you need that little notch for that turnaround to start happening. Otherwise, you will meet also some that the teachers will come to class, they will do their part, but they will not go beyond the call of duty. They will just end wherever it ends. It's now up to you to take it forward. And in most of the times, this seems to be the struggle for most people of color, that we need much more than just the call of duty for us to really get closer. Unfortunately, that does not always come very often, and it's not very easy to come by. So it takes a bit of yourself to keep on raising your hand and say, "Hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm here." Even though they may be looking away, and you keep on raising your hand, "I'm here," until you meet that person that can say, "Hey, but this person think deserves a chance," and then they get to also consider you.
Okay, thank you. So we're coming up on time, but we'll do, I guess, one more question that was submitted in the Q&A that maybe is a good way to kind of move forward for the students who are in the audience today. What organizations and associations do you belong to, or that you are aware of, that help to support BIPOC scientists in your field?
Oh, I would say every professional society that I'm a member of definitely supports people of color, which is really nice, like authentically. So I'm a member of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, Geological Society of America, Society of Integrated Comparative Biology. There's definitely one other that I'm terribly missing in there, but these professional societies are, in my view, definitely aware of kind of the limitations and lack of diversity across all science fields, particularly geology and paleontology have very low numbers of diversity. And every single society dedicated to the field is aware of that. They're putting on committees and workshops and just being aware, and they're amplifying student voices, students of color like that are coming up through the field, like Ken did for me, for inviting me to this event, which is really, really kind. So I would say there's a lot of support, which is nice. The lack of diversity, when you walk into a room and you're the only brown person, it's not the best feeling, truly, it's not, but these organizations are aware of that, and they can't fix it overnight, but what they can do is, by being supportive, is they can get more people into these rooms to make the next generation coming up more comfortable, and then more comfortable. So that's kind of how I view these professional orgs, and they're really good. So I feel supported. Yeah, I do.
So to my knowledge, there are not any like BIPOC run taxidermy associations. Every state has different taxidermy associations. So I would say if someone is looking for a taxidermy association, to go to your state association and feel what the temperature is. But be safe, and protect your sanity and self and all of that stuff too. Like, don't go into a situation where you don't feel comfortable. But if anyone is interested in taxidermy, I'm always happy to connect you to anyone in my professional network, because there is just no formal like BIPOC taxidermy association or anything like that. But another thing I do that I found super helpful is just participating in associations and affinity groups that are adjacent to the things in taxidermy, like various nature groups, or for me, I love birds, so birding groups, and other outdoors groups that are supportive of people of color in the sciences and in the outdoors and in the arts. So I would say that if your particular area doesn't have an explicitly supportive association, then to find something adjacent to it and then grow your network from there. Like one thing I did was I noticed that there was no taxidermy showcase in my own city that was accessible to people. So I used my network and started one, and it's not perfect and it's not huge and big, but kind of use, if there's no existing network, find one just outside of it, and then that will hopefully help you and help everything grow.
So archaeology is an elitist discipline. It's trying to transform, but it's still a long way. That being said, there are many instances where people of color are given a chance. There's the Society of Africanist Archaeologists, which is basically archaeologists that are interested in Africa and do research in Africa or sympathetic to the African cause, and they do try to support through conference programs and other networking roundtable associations that try and bring people close. But it's more, I think it's more of an individual effort than a societal policy drive, and all of this means that if you are there and you have some kind of hunger in you, you have a chance, and I think that's what really matters. That you have that chance. If you can get somebody that can hold your hand once in a while, I think that's all that at least matters. But in Africa, I think there are some places that are slowly beginning to change, where the discipline is beginning to have more of people of color, both on the teaching staff as well as in the students, because for a long time the subject has just been limited to the historic white dominated institutions and classes, and the subject really had not transformed for many of the institutions in Africa. It still remains a case for a good number of those, but I think there are signs of hope and signs of change. And I think with perhaps a bit more support, we can see slightly broader and bigger change. But perhaps us here in the Americas as well as in Europe, we have a chance, I think, to give Africa a voice and give people of color, both in Europe, in Africa, and the Americas, also a chance to link and connect with Africa, because I think there's that small disconnect that is there between Africa and African Americans, for example, and all this has to do with things that we can certainly do something and change. I admire those that have the courage to start their associations, and I think that's one big step. And those are the smaller steps that people can do to try and do something about this. Thanks.
Okay, so I know everyone's time is valuable, so I think we'll wrap it up there. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today, Kiersten, Divya, Foreman, for your very insightful comments. I really appreciate your insights and candor. And I hope this has been a informative and interesting discussion for all of our attendees, especially students in the audience. I'll close just with a reminder that Another Black and STEM panel discussion will be taking place at the time of next week's Armor Seminar, so Wednesday at noon. We'll have 3 additional panelists joining us to have the discussion. So please tune in for that. You can register for that on the museum's seminar series website. And if you've done it today, you know how to do it already. Also, another good upcoming Black History Month event is tomorrow, February 17th at 6 p.m. It'll be a special webinar on the Southern Underground Railroad. So you can find registration details for that on the museum's Black History Month website, and I definitely encourage you to attend that. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next week.